Hi, this is Robin, and this is part two of my How to Emulate Retro Photo Looks in Photoshop set. I'll include two step-by-step Photoshop demos, one showing how to create a 1980s color photo look, and the other a 1990s look. There will be links to the start times for each demo in the description below the video if you want to hop around or revisit. And then for each decade, what I'll do is I'll provide a brief analysis of the look to be achieved, and then we'll walk through the Photoshop steps to achieve that look. The description will also have a link to my part one video, which was how to emulate 1960s and 70s retro photo looks. So if you want to look for those decades and how to achieve that look as well, look for the link in the description. Okay, so let's just dive in and start. So for demo number one, we're going to do the 1980s retro photo look. And what I want to do, I think it's important for us to do this, is to start with an analysis of some actual 1980s photos, because we sort of want to know what we want to replicate. So I just pulled three examples here, and these are not my photos and these are not stock photos, so I cannot provide them you links to them. So you're just going to maybe have to do some of your own research or look at these as reference for when you try to do your own 1980s looks. For one of the things I think you should keep in mind here is that for ease of processing, try when you're doing your photo shoot to mimic the fashions, the hairstyles, the makeup, the props, any of the prevalent colors that were popular in these decades that I'm going to be focusing on, and simulate, what those things look like during your photo shoot. It will save you a ton of time than just to do the processing for the overall look of the decade versus having to do what I'm going to have to do here, which is convert colors and some of the general appearance to look a little bit more appropriate to the decade before doing an overall look. Okay, so with that said, I'm just going to focus on things we can adjust in Photoshop versus giving you tips for, how to dress people and the kind of hairstyles to do and the props that might be appropriate. All right. So when we look at these, at least four example images, and not every image will be the same from the 1980s, what I am seeing is bold, saturated primary colors. There's especially very vibrant reds. Again, with the primary colors, you'll see electric blues and also very vivid yellows in the 1980s pictures, photographs. It's, I guess, when some of the Fuji and Kodak films were popular, definitely this is a significant move away from the 1970s earth tones that I showed you in the prior video. Now, in addition to these very bold colors, you will also see in the 1980s some pastels. And here's an example here. So mint green, soft pink, lavender, baby blue, this, soft yellow here. And that's representing from that era sort of the preppy aesthetic. So you just have to decide kind of what look you want to go for, okay? The 1980s prints tend to or can develop a magenta, so I see it more in these kind of images, a magenta or a yellowish, there's more yellow in this image here, overall cast. And that is caused by the instability of the dyes over time. And so depending on the film and the use of the dyes and where the prints were kept, they can develop these color casts. Another thing, we don't see it in these examples, but to keep in mind when you are trying to emulate or simulate the 1980s retro look is they still in the 1980s had rounded corners on the images as well as the thinner white borders. So that carried over from the 1970s prints. Another thing I see in analyzing and looking at these images is that there's a lot of high contrast. There are very deep shadows. There are very bright highlights. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as you're trying to simulate the look in Photoshop. It's important to be conscious of those things and try to mimic it. Now, we can't really see it on these images so well because they were from other sources, and so these are kind of low resolution images. But as far as grain, that's another thing to be conscious of when you're trying to simulate. The grain in the 1980s is finer than that of the 1970s looks, but it is still visible. And then sometimes you'll see random specks of light, but definitely you'll see more visible grain if there's a low light image. So it's not like some of the digital cameras of contemporary times where, they handle noise really well. You will see it in these film produced images. Now, when we look at something like this, which is a studio shot, I believe this is Demi Moore, however she pronounces it, you will see very strong illumination in the 1980s and very harsh flashes, and sometimes you will see red eye. So normally we try to get rid of red eye, but if you want it to look more like a 1980s look, you might want to leave it or fake it, okay? The other thing that I'm seeing here in these sample images and the ones I've seen elsewhere too is that there's definitely noticeable vignettes. So a vignette, if you're not familiar with it, is a darkening around the edges that's compared to the center of the picture. It's darker. So if you look around the edges here, hopefully in the video, it's possible to see that there is darkening here in the corners and the edges. Definitely you see it here too, and it's also happening here, even though there's some light and sun flare going on over here. So these are all things to build into your look, and that's why it's important to kind of analyze some images. And I'm going to keep a couple of these open for reference just so we can see what we're aiming towards in terms of the look. So anyway, I think that's enough for analysis for this demo on the 1980s looks. So let's move into creating the look. I am going to keep a couple of these open just as source photos for reference, but I'm going to pause the video for just a moment to get set up for the demo, so hold on. Okay, so now we are going to move into the step-by-step Photoshop workflow for the demo of how to create the 1980s retro color photo look. Now, what I'm going to do in both this 1980s and the 1990s demos in this video is, to save time, I have already pre-created the layers that were needed to convert this contemporary photo to look more like the kind of clothing colors. Okay, so again, as I said right at the beginning of this demo, it'll be much better and faster if when you do your photo shoot to try to create a 1980s look, you have people clothed in the colors that were appropriate for the time, the kind of hair, the makeup, the props, etc. So I'm going to try to save time, and I did this in advance, and then I'll just get to where we can start changing the skin colors and the overall look to be more of a 1980s look. Okay, so the first thing you will do is open your image into Photoshop, and you'll have a background layer, and I suggest that you duplicate it to have a copy and work on the copy. The way you can duplicate it is do a Control or Command J, as in jump it up, or you can take that background layer and just drag it down to the new layer icon, the box with the plus, and either way you'll get a copy. Okay, so now we're going to go into kind of my pre-baked layers here just to show you what I did. The first thing I did was convert the child's clothing and hat to try to get into more the kind of primary colors that we're working with for the 1980s. So let me just turn on the eye visibility, and this is, you can see we've got more of those reds and bold colors there. Okay, so let me just expand this for a moment and show you what I did. Okay, so just stepping through this, I first selected the child's clothing and hat using the object selection tool, just lassoed around. It made a selection. I added a hue and saturation layer to get it more to the reds. And then just to give it a little extra pop, I added a vibrance adjustment layer, clipped that layer to this layer so it only affected the clothing. Then, because the hat was coming out differently, probably because the sun is hitting it, I made a selection of just the hat, even though it was included in the initial selection, and just tweaked the color of how that had appeared so it matched the clothing a little bit better with another hue and saturation layer. And then same thing, just gave it a little bit more color boost with vibrance. Vibrance is much better than saturation if you just want to get more of a color pop and you don't want to alter the colors and the appearance of the colors. Also, because this had appeared a little bit differently and a little less warm, you can still see it's a little whiter and brighter. I just overlaid a solid color fill layer with a little bit of a yellow hint to it to try to warm this hat up to match the clothing a little bit better. And again, a little bit more vibrance. So that, and then what I did was here, so this is, maybe if you're not familiar with this, is I grouped this whole thing. So once I had this top layer active, this vibrance layer, I pressed the Shift key, went and clicked on the lowest layer in that whole group, and then came to the bottom of the layers panel and clicked this little manila folder icon to create this whole group. And so what it does is it keeps your layer stack a little bit more tidy and a little less spread out, but you can expand it and look at and modify your layers if you want to. Okay, so that was the first pre-baked things, was the child's clothing. Then, as I said, they had the rich blues and whatever, so, and rich primary colors. So I converted the wagon from that green to a rich blue. And again, I worked with a hue and saturation layer and just moved the sliders, as you can see here in the properties panel, increased the saturation and made it darker. So lightness would be to the right, darkness is to the left. So I think now we're at the stage where we've got some of the basic clothing and accessory colors that would be appropriate to the 80s. So now let's move into more of the step-by-step type of demo that you can see where I'm actually working through it. Okay, so the first thing to think about is my image has a subject with skin. So if yours, the images that you're working on do, then you're going to need to pay attention to this also. If you don't, you can just wait and go on to where I start saying that we'll do the general 1980s look steps, but this shouldn't take too long, so it's just general information. Okay, so I'm on the top layer that was already there. I want to, as I said, they have more of a peachy kind of a look and more this reddish kind of a look here for the 1980s. So I want to get this very pale child's look to look a little bit more like the subjects here. And I am, for my image, going to go for more of this magenta cast versus the yellowy cast. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. So I'm going to use the color tones up here as more reference for what I'm going to do. I'm going to come to the toolbar. My toolbar is docked right. Yours might be left. My layers panel is at the top, properties panel at the bottom. So just so you know where I'm going. I'm going to use the object selection tool. It's that box with the arrow. And I want to be sure that the options bar, the settings for that object selection tool, is set to lasso. Okay. I have sample all layers active as well. So what I'm going to do to start here to change the color of the skin is select anywhere where there's skin. So with the lasso, I go just a little bit outside of what I want selected, and it should snap to where I want with this tool. There we go. Okay. Next, we'll do the face. And again, I'm just lassoing around just just outside of what I want selected. Okay, then the legs. I'm going to come a little lower, see if it captures where the skin is showing through the muddy water here. All right, so that did a pretty good job. And I will give my usual disclaimer that I'm not going to be a perfectionist. You can see that what I was doing, since I was working fast for this, it doesn't have the best selection there. So take the time that you need, take longer than I'm doing. I just want to get you through the steps. Okay, so now that we've made this selection and keep the active marching ants, want to come to the bottom of the layers panel and add a hue and saturation layer. Go to the add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line, hue and saturation, left click, and we have a hue and saturation layer. And as you know, it automatically generates the mask so that when we adjust hue and saturation, it is only going to work on white areas of the mask. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Oh, and the other thing is I always go back to the lasso tool just so I know where I am. You don't have to do that. It's just like me resetting my camera back to its default setting so I don't start shooting the wrong thing. So I'll just keep putting it back to the lasso. You do not have to do that. Okay, so now that we have the hue and saturation layer, what we want to do is looking at the properties panel for that hue and saturation layer. Right now it says master, so that's affecting all the colors. I only want to be working with the child's skin, so let's see. Yeah, so if I click with this little targeted selection tool on the skin, what it says is that that skin falls into the reds. Okay, so that's what I want to adjust, is only the reds, not all of the colors. So I'm going to come, I already have the hue set because I'm working with the reds. I'm going to come down to the saturation and increase the saturation so it starts getting the richness of some of this kind of skin that we see in the 80s photos that's in the sun. I'm just going to click on that handle, pull it to the right, and you don't see it real time, so I just go short distances and release. And I watch the image. There's no formula. It's trial and error. Your image may need a different amount of saturation than mine, so just watch your image and do it, the adjustments to taste. Trial and error. It's getting more like when it, see, and sometimes what I'd like to do typically is go, okay, yeah, that's too much, is go past it and then come back. Then I know I'm not missing something. So I think that 60 is pretty good, at least to start. Okay, and then what I want to do is the skin is still kind of pale. So I'm going to, while we're here still in the hue and saturation properties, I'm going to adjust it and make it a little darker. So light would be to the right, and if you look at the slider, dark is to the left. Again, I'm watching the skin to see what's happening, since that's the only part that's being affected with that mask. All right, I think that's pretty good. One thing I want to do is her face got very red. Maybe it's okay just for purposes of this, but let's just say on here that I want to make it a little less red on the face. Let me see if I can get this to be maybe more of a gray. I don't have to be so precise. Okay, so I'm selecting a gray color because on the mask right now it's just black and white. So if we use a gray, it'll be a little less intense. If you use it as a white, it's going to be the full intensity of what you're doing. So just to see if it will be a little less red if we use a gray rather than the white. So I want to work only on the mask. So be sure the mask is active with a white frame around it if you want to doctor the mask. And then on your toolbar, choose the brush tool right there. I'm going to leave mine at 100% opacity and 100% flow normal. And I have a soft brush, okay? So I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger with the right bracket key. And then I'm only going to paint in the, whoops, it's too much. Okay. All right, so let me lower the opacity then. Do it just a little bit. There we go. So, and that's what I said. So, oh, and if you do something that goofs like that, if you're not aware of it, you can do a Control or Command Z to go back And then I just lowered the opacity setting here in the options bar for the brush tool. Okay, so I think that's enough. It just toned it down a little bit. Let me put the opacity back to 100% so we don't forget that that's there. And again, that was working just on the mask. So let's just look at this quickly and see what we've done. Yeah, so look at the skin. I'll turn the eye visibility on the layer off and on. And we've gotten it closer to how this kind of skin looks out in the sun for the 1980s film kind of transitioning on the colors look. Okay, so now that I got that set, I'm going to add a stamp layer. So the way I do it is go to the bottom of the layers panel, click on the add new layer icon, that box with the plus, you get an empty layer, and then you do what I call the claw maneuver. So it's Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option, and E all at the same time, and that makes a stamp layer. And essentially what that is it's like a composite or a merge of everything that's come before, but without flattening the layers. So you can go backwards if you want to, but it does stamp it in there. So if you do want to go back and make changes to earlier layers, you're going to have to undo that and get rid of that layer. Okay, I'm going to set my color pickers back to the default by pressing the D key for default, and then I'm just going to go back to my neutral tool. Okay, so now we have our stamp layer. So now this is where I said, if you didn't have to convert skin to, you know, a little bit more of that damaged magenta or yellowy kind of look for the 1980s, now is when I'll start the overall 1980s look. So if you haven't needed to do it, this is where you can pick up. And I'm going to take a quick drink of water. My throat feels scratchy. Okay. So now we're essentially starting from a base layer. Hopefully you can be following along with this. So the first thing I want to do is add more contrast to this, because this is a fairly soft, and when you look at these images, and especially this one, look at how contrasty that is. So rather than adding a bunch of individual adjustment layers to achieve the look, I'm going to show you a different approach that maybe will save some time. So with that layer active, we're going to go to the top of the interface to filter and come down to camera raw filter and left click. Wait for that interface to open. We're now in camera raw. Okay, so now the first thing I want to do to start adding a little bit more contrast and definition here is come to the effects area, and I'm going to work with clarity. You do not have to go in the order that these sliders appear. Okay, so I'm going to pull to, I want more clarity, so I'm going to pull it to the right. And again, no formula, just do it to taste for your own image. I'm just, again, watching the image, and I go short distances, and when it looks good to me, I stop. All right, so I'm going to stop there for the clarity. Next, I want to add a little bit more texture, because again, it'll give it more definition. But in my image, I'm going to watch, I don't want the water to get too crunchy, and I don't want the ground to get too crunchy. So, you know, just keep in mind for your image. So again, texture slider, I'm going to go right. I want more texture. That's getting to be a bit much. Okay, so I'll come back. And again, you can see things here like the bad sampling and selection there. You can see that if I was going to do this for a real life picture, I would have taken the time to touch this up because it retained some of the colors, but you're getting the main steps. This isn't going to be your image anyway. Okay. So, all right. So we've done clarity and texture. So I think we're doing okay. Next, I'm going to work with the dehaze slider that's here also under effects. And again, pull it to the right for more dehazing. Come back a little bit. Okay, All right, so we've done some dehazing. Now, one thing I'll point out, I have come up to 10 here. Now, keep in mind, we are doing a retro look here. Typically, when I am doing processing, I never, ever, ever, for like real, more contemporary kinds of images, go up above 5 on dehaze because it can get way too dark and way too contrasty. So if I even use dehaze, I typically stay under 5. But for this retro look, I want to crank it up a little bit more. Okay, the next thing we want to do, again, building on the contrast. So without having to do all those adjustment layers, it's all handy and right here. So let's go up to the light category and let's work with the contrast slider. Okay. Alternatively, if you don't want to work with that contrast slider or with all of these, you can try working with curves down here if you like to work with curves. But I'm just going to stay in these two areas here. So let me just quickly try the eye visibility so you can see what we've done here in terms of the definition. I just click on it and hold it and then release. Yeah, so there's some subtle contrast, so that's good. Okay, one of the things I'd mentioned in the analysis was that I said that in the 80s there was definitely a more visible vignette around the outside of the edges of the images. So we're going to come back to effects and we're going to try to add a vignette from here. Always look at the sliders for a clue as to what's going to happen. So if you pull the vignette slider to the right, it's going to give you a white or milky vignette. If you pull it to the left, it's going to give you the darker vignette. So I want a darker, I don't want the milky. Watch again the edges of the image and you can see the vignette. Maybe I'll overdo it just so you can see what's happening. Okay. So as it went by there, I think 18 to 20. All right. I'll split the difference. Okay. Now, with vignette, you can see there's another little arrowhead here. If you click on that, there are more adjustments you can make with the vignette. So let me just click to show you. So there's additional things that you can use here. One that you might want to work with particularly is the roundness. Okay, so again, watch the image and hopefully you'll see as I do it, it makes it more squared off or more round. I'm going to bring mine in more like that. Okay, so that's optional, but just to let you know it's there. And then finally, as I mentioned, that as opposed to the 70s look where there was some moderate grain, in the 1980s it was definitely finer grain. So I'm going to work with this grain slider here. And again, I showed you different methods for creating grain in the 1960s and 70s demos in the part 1 video. So I just like to show you different kinds of things so you can try the ones that you want. So I am going to just pull this slider here. And let me zoom in a little bit so I can see what's happening. Child's face in the background. Okay, I think that's pretty good because I can see grain here and I can see grain here, but it's not too much. All right, so I think I'm going to leave that like that. Now, the thing, with working in these digital toolboxes like Photoshop or whatever, you have to keep in mind that grain is a different thing than noise. So grain tended to be more random, I guess is the best word for it, whereas noise tends to be more uniform. So when you get the digital noise, it's more uniform, and the shapes are a little bit different when you're working with grain, and that's why I showed you the methods that I showed you to get more random looking grain in the previous video too. So it was a different method than this. All right, so once you get yours the way you like it, come to the bottom of the interface, click OK. And you'll be sent back to the Photoshop interface. Okay, and maybe I'm just looking here and debating, so I think I'll just modify this label to say that this was Adobe Camera Raw Contrast vignette, I'll abbreviate it, and grain. So that was all handled in one place versus having to do multiple adjustment layers. Okay, so now let's add another stamp layer. And again, I think you can just do that claw maneuver, but I like to always do an empty layer first, just so I see that it's filling in and not altering anything. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, blank layer, and then we do the claw. Shift, Controller, Command, Alter, Option, and E all at the same time for that stamp layer. Okay, I'll label it. Just so if you look at this later, you know what I'm doing. Okay, so now, as I mentioned, in the analysis, 1980s tended to get either a magenta color cast or a little bit more yellowed color cast over time as the dyes changed and or the type of film that was used impacted it. So I'm going more for the magenta look. So to get that overall magenta look, because we're definitely not there yet here, I want to add an adjustment layer that's a photo filter. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, it's the circle with the line, and we're going to use photo filter. So click on that. And we've got the photo filter layer opened. We've got the associated properties for that. Now you could go in and double click on this color picker that's here and pick a color that you want for the color cast. Or you could come right next to where it says filter and the default is warming. There's a little down arrow, click on that. And again, if you wanted to do the yellow look, then you could stop at yellow. I'm going to go for the magenta, so I'm going to left click on magenta. Okay, and if you see it, look at the image, icon, eye on, eye off. Okay, so we've added that magenta kind of cast to this image, and it has added it to the color picker here, so you know you're working with the magenta. Now, we do have the option here of moving this slider to make it more or less dense, okay? So again, I can't give you a formula, just kind of do it to your taste. And I think I'm just going to do a hint. Another way to do it, you could do it higher and then lower the opacity up here in the layers panel. So I just want that hint of that magenta cast. I don't want it to scream magenta. All right, so let me leave it there. Okay, so honestly, you could be finished right here with this. So this was very fast by working in the Adobe Camera Raw and using all those different filters and sliders in there. So if we compare the before, which is a contemporary stock photo, I believe I got it from Pixabay, to the after, we've gotten a much more 1980s kind of look, and I can reduce the opacity here a little bit. That's before and that's after. So not only are we mimicking more the clothes colors and the rich primary colors, the reds, the yellows, the blues of the era, but we've also gotten more of the contrast, and we've gotten that magenta film cast from over the years. All right, so you either stop here and you're perfectly fine, or I'm going to show you optionally, again, a way to add the rounded corners that carried over from the 1970s to the 1980s, as well as the thin white border, so it would look more like a 1980s color print. So what I would suggest you do is, because I am going to flatten these layers, so if you want to do this, we are going to flatten the layer stack. I suggest that you save this layer stack in case you want to make modifications to it after you look at it again and don't want to have to start all over again. So to save the whole stack, if you're not familiar, you would come to the upper part of the interface to File, Save As, and then Save As Type Photoshop. So you want to save it as a PSD. So you would just give your file whatever name you want to give it, and then choose from the list Photoshop, okay? And it will automatically put that .psd file extension. I'm going to cancel because I don't need to save it. So once you get that layer stack saved, if you think you might want to make modifications, then you come to the top across from where it says layers to that little hamburger menu, left click, and come down to where it says flatten image and left click. And you can see it's flattened it all as if it's now just a new starting image. All right, so we want to do the same thing we normally would do when we're starting with a new image. And I'll just do a Control or Command J to duplicate that. But you could also click on and drag that background layer down to the new layer icon. And this is just a background copy. All right, so now to get our rounded corners and to get that white border that they had for the 1980s prints, we want to work with the rectangle tool. So again, I have funny things going on my toolbar. So if you look on the toolbar, I have a banana, but you should have 3 little dots. If you right click on there or click on there, right click on that little triangle there, you'll see the various tools that are available. Come down to where it says the rectangle tool and have it highlighted, left click on that, and then it will show up here as the active tool. Now, before you start using that tool, as I said, all these tools have options or settings associated with them. Before you start using it, check the options bar for the rectangle tool. Be sure you're on path, because there are other options. So be sure you're on path, and then come all the way over and use either a 50 or 5260 pixel curve. Okay, so then it'll give you a softer corner. Okay, so just do whichever amount that you want. All right, so once you get those settings set, then you line up this in the corner of your image. And again, take more time than I am going to do here for demo purposes, just to be sure you get the whole image. There are alignment tools you can use also, but I'm just going to click and pull. So I'll probably miss some of the image. All right, so I clicked in the upper left corner. I'm dragging diagonally down to the lower right corner and releasing. I'm using a mouse, and get the pink bounding box with the handles in the corners. And then you have these little blue circles just inside the corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab any one of those little circles and just pull it in diagonally towards the center of the image. And watch the corners as I do it. All right, so see, I'll just exaggerate it so you can go super exaggerated if you want to, but that's not how they were in the 1980s. So I'll just do a little bit of a rounded corner like that. And then once you get it the way you like, just release. Then we're going to come over to the layers panel and just come across. We have to come to the paths panel right here. Click on that. Okay. If you do not see a tab for the paths panel, your paths panel is not open, come to the top of the interface to where it says window, click on that, come down and just click on the word paths. So you can see mine's already open because I have a check mark. So if you need to open it, you can. All right, once you have the paths panel open and active, you can see it says there is a work path. Come to the bottom of that panel and just on this little dashed circle, click on that to create a selection of that path. Okay, so it's converted the path to a selection. And you can see I've gone in on this side and out on that side. But again, take your time to make your own drag across for that. All right, once you get that active selection, you can go back to your layers panel, reactivate it by clicking on that again. And now what we want to do is add a layer mask to this active layer. So bottom of the layers panel, click on the add layer mask, which is that rectangle with a circle inside. Click on that and see it's added a mask using that selection that we had. Let me just, I'm pressing Alt or Option to show what the mask looks like. So you can see that it has captured the rounded corners, and that what we want the picture to be is the rounded and the white area in here. So I'll just Alt Option again. It's a toggle to put that back. Okay, and now if I turn off the eye visibility for the background layers, just click that off, you can see that what we have there is transparency. And you can see I didn't quite make it. So take your time and just be sure it goes all the way out to the edges when you're doing yours. All right, so now what we want to do is we only have a little bit of transparency here, and we want to have a larger canvas. So the area that we work on, the canvas is the editable area in the workspace here. So what we want to do is enlarge the canvas so that we can have a white full border around the whole image. Okay, so to do that, we want to come up to the image menu at the top of the interface. So up at the left, image, come down to canvas size and left click, and we get the dialog box for canvas size. Okay, and it'll show you what your current size is. And again, yours will probably differ from mine because you're going to be working on different images. So you get to see the reference of your current size, and you can set the new size that you want the canvas to be. And as I said, I want to expand it so I can add a white border. Now, you'll notice I have it as inches. That's something I can relate to, and it's meaningful to me. If you work in metric, or if you do a lot of illustration in like pixels, you can click on that little down arrow and you can change it to whatever you feel comfortable with. But I personally like to work with inches, so that's what I'll have here. I want to add 1 inch to each of these dimensions. So I will just highlight the number and change. I'm just typing in a 19 instead of an 18. And this I'll make a 13 instead of a 12. Okay, I leave relative unchecked. So now for the 1980s look, it's a narrow white border. If for other projects of yours, you want to have a big white border or something and make it, kind of look that elegant gallery look, then I would say check relative, because it'll add a lot more white or a lot more space to your image. Okay, so I leave it unchecked for this 1980s look. Anchor, I want to keep the anchor point in the center, and the canvas extension color, I'm just going to leave it on the white and click OK. All right, and you see it's expanded the canvas, and what it expanded was the transparency. So we still do not have white. So we want to have white around the edges of this. So the way to do that is go to bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, solid color. Okay, and what we want is white. So I'm just going to click right up in here, but it's not a true white. So I'm going to come down here and do a 255. Let me, do this over again here. Solid color. Right, and we'll do a 0 here. There we go. Okay, so now I want to change it to be a white. So I'm going to do a 255 in each of these. That's white. Okay, so now we have the pure white for the border, and you can see that here's the current color, and here's what we're changing it to. So that's good. Okay. All right, so now that we have the white, it has, as Photoshop does, as you build up layers in Photoshop, as you know, whatever's on top will cover whatever's below it as long as it is opaque or solid. If there's a transparency on top, you will see through to whatever's opaque below it. So we want to left click on this opaque white layer and just drag it and then release to below the image that has the transparency, so you can see the white through it. And now we have our 1980s curved corners and white border color print look, and we're finished. So that was an optional step, but if you want that extra look, because it was something that was typical of color prints in the 1980s, then you know how to get that look as well. So that is the end of demo number 1 for this video on how to get the retro 1980s look. I'm going to pause this video and get set up for demo number 2, which will be the only other demo on how to get the 1990s photo look. So hold on. Okay, so now this will be demo number 2 and how to achieve a 1990s retro photo look, and again, color print look. So again, the same process that we did in demo number 1. I'm going to start with an analysis of some actual photos from the 1990s. And then, and again, just look online and see if you can find some to use for reference, unless you don't have some of your own. I can't share these because they are not stock images. So I pulled some 1990s images. And then the other thing that I did, and I suggest you do, is do some research on the clothing of that era that you're going to be shooting. So I found this 1990s, they refer to as vintage, Oshkosh floral dress. So not only does it sort of look like the dress in here, but I'm going to use that same demo image with the child. So I want to try to match their clothing to look a little bit like something that I know was a print from the 1990s, both in terms of the color and the style of the print. Okay, so that's why I pulled that particular one. All right, so as we look in the analysis part here at these 1990s photos, what was typical for the 1990s is that the images became more realistic, more documentary, and you saw a lot of kind of grunge influences rather than the 1980s glamorous, glam stuff and the Reagan and all that stuff. So definitely more gritty, grungy, realistic documentary for the 1990s. The photos, as you can see in this cross-section right here, tended to have warm undertones. So when you're trying to match the look, think about the warm undertones. The skin tones were somewhat peachy. That person's sort of hidden back there, but you can still see it. And even this has a peachy-ish kind of look to it, even though it's more blown out with the highlights. So skin should be peachy rather than that real kind of magenta ready look that we saw in the 1980s that we just went through. Even though there are some intense colors here, I would say that typically there was muted saturation. It was definitely more subdued or faded than our modern digital images for the 1990s era. So, think about, toning down the saturation a bit and taking it down a little bit. Also, even though it looks like there's dark blacks, I would say that the blacks were slightly lifted, so slightly hazy, and that there are flatter highlights, and the highlights tended to be blown. So look at the example of the car here and lacking detail. Now, this is pretty typical, even though these are just a few images here. So again, flatten the highlights, tend to be blown, lacking detail in the highlights. And then there's also, again, these are film images right here. So these examples. So there was a subtle blur or softness that looked, different than what we see in today's digital images. Again, in this decade of the 1990s, we're definitely seeing magenta or cyan color casts to the images. So this one has a little bit more of the cyan, I'd say, going on, but definitely more magenta. And I'm going to skew for my demo more for the magenta, so you can pick the look that you want. And it, again, depended on the film, depended on the aging or the lab processing or whatever, but you don't typically see that in the more contemporary images. I would say that in the 90s, there was fine grain, just like in the 80s. It wasn't, as heavily pronounced as in the 1970s, like we showed in the video number 1, part 1 of this set of 2. But as we got into the mid 1990s, there were more and more digital cameras being used. So it started shifting more in terms of the appearance of the prints and the images from, as I said, the random grain or the randomness of the shapes of the grain to more uniform noise. So just think about, if you're trying to emulate the mid 1990s and on, then maybe use noise and keep it uniform. If you're doing before that, then do a fine grain look. And I showed you how to create grain looks both in this demo and this one, this video as well as the previous video using different approaches. Okay, and then the final thing is we did not see in the 90s as much of those rounded corners and the white borders. I'm sure there were still some out there, but it was less of it. It was less popular. But you did tend to see glossy paper and glossy prints being used. So I'll show you an optional approach to try to somewhat emulate that glossy photo print look as one of the optional steps at the end after we work through the look that we're creating. Okay, so now I think that's enough of analysis of the things that we want to try to look for and replicate in terms of the look of the pictures in that era. So let me pause this, get set up for the demo. Hold on. Okay, so now this will be the step-by-step workflow to try to create the 1990s retro color photo look. And as you can see, I'm working with that same stock image that I've used for all of these demos just to see if we can get a similar image to look like it's representing different eras. And I'm going to do the same thing in this step-by-step that I did for the 1980s just to save time. I have kind of pre-baked some of the conversions of the color. So again, these weren't typical color clothes, versus something like this from the 1990s. And there would have been different colored toys. So I think those wagons, oh gee, what were they called? I can't even remember. It was not a Red Rider or something, I forget. But anyway, it was the red from those wagons that were so popular in the 1990s. So we're going to swap that color in here. So if you have not shot specifically with the colors and the kind of clothing and props that would have been used for the 1990s, then you just know that you can go in and make some modifications, but it will be a lot faster if you don't have to do that. Okay, so let me just walk you through what I did very quickly without all the actual settings. Okay, so again, you've opened your background image. You want to duplicate it and work on a copy. You could do a controller command, J, on the background layer to jump up a copy, or click and drag that to the Add New Layer icon. Either way, you'll get a copy. All right, so then what I did was I wanted to change the colors of the child's clothing to look more like something from the 1990s. So I'll turn that eye visibility on, and this is a group with all the layers, so I'll just click that right arrow to expand and show you what I did. So again, I used my object selection tool, and I just ran it with the lasso around the child's clothing, and that let me create the mask on a hue and saturation layer, and then I just moved the sliders to the colors that I wanted to try to emulate something like this little dress from the 1990s. Okay, this Oshkosh vintage outfit, and get it looking a little bit more 1990s. So then, just to give it another little boost, you'll remember in the first demo I added some vibrance. Well, here I wanted to beef up these colors a little bit, so I added a color fill layer and I clipped it. So in other words, sort of attached it to the layer below so that it only applied to the clothing that the child was wearing. Then we came up and again, some of the red or the pink was still showing through for the original outfit. So again, I selected more of a teal color. I just used the eyedropper tool and selected a color from in here or in here because I'm using these for reference for the 1990s. And then I used that as the color picker to create another color fill layer and overlaid that. So you can see from the mask, let me just show you. I only selected the sleeves and that one stripe on the outfit just to get them the extra boost of that color and cover up the color that was there beforehand. And then again, because the reds were pretty rich here and on this outfit, I wanted to give the reds on this outfit a little bit more of a boost. So again, let me just show you this mask. So that only selected the red colors, and the way I did that was up at the top of the interface, select color range. And I'm not going to go through all this, I'm just pointing it out to you. And then what I did was I clicked after I went into that and on where the reds were, selected them in order to make a red selection, and then just overlaid this color on those areas to make it more boosted. And then finally I added just a little bit of brightness because it made all these dulled colors, dulled it out. And this child, I'm assuming it's a girl, given the colors of her original outfit, is out in the sun. So I added a layer of brightness. So that, and then once I got to the top of that layer stack of things related to the clothing, it was highlighted just like that. I pressed Shift and then I held Shift and I clicked on the bottom, and then I clicked on this group layer, and then that created this group. So it just keeps it a little bit more orderly and tidy so you don't have as many layers. Okay, and if I turn that off, you can see what it did to the colors. Okay, and then next, as I mentioned, I wanted to change the wagon to more of those Red Ryder or whatever those wagons were called from the 1990s. So again, expanding that by clicking that little arrow. I did this separately. So first I selected, as you can see from the mask, just the wagon, and I used a hue and saturation layer to change that to more of this dulled red, so it became a little orangier. And then I selected just the handle or the hitch or whatever you want to refer to that as, and dulled that color because it's not that super vibrant yellow that it was in the 80s. So I just dulled that down a little bit on that. Okay. So that's, and then after with those two layers, I highlighted. I created the group layer again just to keep that together. And then if you double click on any of these words, you can title it or change it. So we've got our clothing group and our wagon group. All right, so now we're ready to build on that. And again, it's sort of the same proviso that I had in the 1980s image. If you have a subject with skin, then you're going to want to make the skin peachier, like I said from the analysis, on your subject. And clearly this is a very fair child. She doesn't have that kind of peachy, orangey, kind of 1990s photo print look. So let me make her bigger so we can select her. Okay, so again, this is an optional step if you do not have any skin to be altered to make it more peachy. So again, on my toolbar, I'm going to choose the object selection tool, the box with the arrow, left click, be sure it's active with the black behind it, and be sure that in the options bar at the top, you have it set to lasso. If you're just doing a geometric shape like the wagon, you could use rectangle, but I just typically use lasso. Okay, so now we're going to choose the skin. So again, I'm going to trace just a little bit outside of the areas that I want to select. Any luck, it snaps to where I want. And again, for demo purposes, I'm not going to worry about perfection on the selections, just the general idea. Okay, so you can see it's snapping to and selecting the skin. All right, and then the legs. All right, so that did a pretty good job of that. And now with that marching ants selection active, let me zoom back out and see what we're doing here. What I want to do is a little bit different than what I've been showing you before. So let's see if we can get this by just altering the color picker a little bit here. I just like to show you different approaches so you can try different things here. So I'm going to, on the toolbar, come to the bottom, I'm going to click on my foreground color picker box, which right now is black for me. Okay, and then I'm going to change the values for, so you can see there's HSB, there's a CMYK, there's an LAB mode, and then there's RGB is right here where my green highlighter is. So I'm going to put in specific numbers to get a peachy look. So this you could grab and use as numbers to use to get a peachy look, and then you can always tweak it from there if you want. So for the red, I'm going to do a 220. I'm just typing it in. And then for the green, I'm going to do a 173. We're going to pray that this works here. Okay, so it's, you can see it's getting to the new color here. And then for the B, for the blue, red, green, blue, I'm going to do a 118. So I just experimented and figured save you the time. Okay, so yeah, so we get that peachier skin tone. Now, if you don't want to be typing in all those numbers, another thing you can make note of here and then just use again is this hex number right here. So D as in dog, C as in cat, A as in apple, D as in dog, 76. So if you note down and enter that hex number in that box, you do not have to enter all these numbers. It'll represent this color. Okay, I'll click OK. All right, so now that we have that set as the foreground color, now let's come to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a color fill or solid color adjustment layer. There we go, solid color. And you can see it's added, so it's using that foreground color, and I'll click OK. Now, needless to say, that looks a little bit weird, doesn't it? It almost looks like the Invisible Man or something. But that's what happens because it's solid. Okay, so now what we want to do is at the top of the layers panel, we're going to a blend mode, and normal is always at the top. So come to that little down arrow, and we're going to use a color blend mode. So that'll blend it in to the image below, and you'll see some more of the details. Okay, so hit color, and we did that. But needless to say, the poor kid looks like she's jaundiced now. So what we want to do is right across from the blend mode, we want to lower the opacity. Okay, so two ways to do that, depending on how you like to work with the interface. You can click on that little down arrow and get a slider, or you can do what I like to do, which is just left click on the word opacity and drag. And I'm going to start at about 50% of what that color is and see how that looks. That's not bad. It's subtle, but yeah, you can see that. All right, so I'm gonna just make it 49 just to make it a little less yellow. All right, so we've got that color fill layer with that peachy color. So now let's just try to balance it out a little bit more. Let's make it a little bigger so it's easy to see the skin color better, because again, I'm looking over at my reference image and I'm using this one versus this blown out one as kind of a more peachy color reference. So the next thing I want to do after this solid color, let me just label it. Peachy. Is I'm going to add a color balance layer and just sort of tweak it a little bit for the skin tones. Okay, so bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, color balance. And we've got our new color balance adjustment layer here in the layers panel, and associated with it is a properties panel. So what I want to work with, since this is light, are the highlights. So where it says tone, just come across to that down arrow. We're going to work with the highlights so it affects the child's skin. Okay, so now again, I want to push more red, like the reference images, into her skin. So working with the highlights, I'm going to move towards the red a little bit here. And again, like any of the other handles and sliders, I just do a little bit at a time and release to see what's happening and watch the image. Yeah, that's getting me more towards where I want to be. See, yeah, it's looking a little bit more towards that. Maybe just a little bit more. I don't want to go too much. Let me just stop at 40. Okay. And then I want to push a little magenta in here because of the magenta cast for the 1990s. So magenta, so we're going to pull the slider towards magenta. And that's pretty good. I don't want to go too nuts. And then last, we'll just get a little bit more. As you see, there's definitely a yellowy tone to these. So I'm going to put some more yellow into this image of mine. And again, so now these, unlike the skin tone where I said, okay, here's a formula you can use, but then tweak it, these are all just to taste with your image. This is not set numbers you should have to apply. Just look at your image and see if you have some reference images, what you feel kind of simulates or emulates the 90s look. Okay, so I'm looking at the skin. I'm ignoring everything else. I'm just looking at the skin, and I think it's got a good peachy kind of a look. Now, we only want to apply this to the skin. So a couple of ways to do that. So we want to clip this layer, this color balance layer, to the layer below so that it is only being applied to the skin, which is the white areas on the mask. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. On this color balance layer, you can either go to the associated properties layer and click on this little icon that's a box with a down arrow there, or you can press Alt or Option and then slowly move that pointer finger up till it's right between the two layers, and you'll get that same kind of icon, the box with the down arrow, and that tells you it's going to clip the upper layer to the layer right below it. And when you do that, did you watch the image? It immediately just put all that peachy tone with the little hint of the magenta only onto the child's skin. Okay, so that's exactly what we wanted it to do. We move back out. Now she's out in the sun. So again, this would be an optional step depending on your image. But I want to add a little bit more contrast to this because when I look at these images, I see quite a fair bit of contrast. So I want to add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon. Sorry, my mouth isn't working. Circle, brightness and contrast. So again, bottom of the layers panel, a new adjustment layer, brightness and contrast. We opened our brightness and contrast adjustment layer. And what I want to do is take the brightness down. See, these have kind of a darky, kind of grungy look to me. So I want to lower the brightness a little bit. I don't want it too glary. All right, let's leave it there for now till I see what happens. Because often what you have to do is you have to do trade-offs, like if you adjust contrast, then you have to adjust brightness a little bit to offset or vice versa. So let's see what happens to the brightness when I add some more contrast. So I'm going to go to the right because I want to increase the contrast. It's too much. All right, let me leave the contrast there. Yeah, see, so I'll turn the eye visibility on and off for that layer, and so you can see it's definitely adding some more contrast, so that is good. Okay, so now what you can do is I'll show you an example of how to do this grouping. So, well, let me maybe clip this to the skin too. So I'm going to, again, Alt or Option and clip this to the skin. There we go. I think that's better that way. All right, so I have this top layer highlighted, this bottom layer also related to the skin. So with this top layer highlighted, I'm going to press and hold Shift, and then I'm going to click on this bottom layer so it highlights all of them. They're all active. Come to the bottom of the layers panel, click on this manila folder icon to group them, and then I will just label this as the skin color. So that's why it keeps it neat and easier to find things if you want to go back and make adjustments. Okay, so now we've already gone through changing the clothes to look more 1990s if you didn't start with them in your photo shoot. If you have a person in the scene, we've made the skin color, and let me just again label this for 1990s. 90s peachy. Okay, so now we're moving into the overall 1990s color toning and color grading kinds of looks. So if you didn't have, sorry about that, if you didn't have any skin tones to deal with, but now we'll pick up to color tone and get the whole image looking more in 1990s. Okay, so now the one thing that we want to start with is a curves adjustment layer. So bottom of the layers panel, let me just do a D to get this back. Yes, okay. Bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, and let's add a curves layer. Okay, so we've got our curves layer, and we're going to work with the RGB curve, which is the entire curve, to do tonal contrast. Now I have my curve in the properties panel for the curves layer set to a dense grid. You can use a more open grid if you want it. It's up to you. I believe if you click on this hamburger menu and go to curves display options, then you can change whether it's a dense grid. Yeah, see, I have it on the denser grid, so you can also do it on the less dense grid if you want. Okay, so using that RGB curve, what I want to do is, I had mentioned that there's very slightly lifted blacks in the 1990s, so I'm going to start with the blacks. So as we look at the curve, you can see the blacks are down in this region of the curve, and the highlights of the whites or the brights are out at the end. So I want to lift up towards the lighter colors, the lighter to this first, maybe just a little bit under that first grid line, just to lift the blacks. You can see it got a little hazier. And then maybe I'll move it in just a little bit to the right. So I moved it up just a bit and right just a bit in the blacks. Okay, so then I had mentioned in the analysis that we wanted to kind of flatten or dull the whites a little bit, so we'll go to the opposite end of the curve where the whites are lined up. So white, this is the white point. So I want to bring that down a little bit. Yep, not too much. Okay, just dull those whites down a little bit, so that I just came halfway to that first horizontal grid line for mine. Again, do it whatever is appropriate for yours. Then I'll come to the center of the curve, and I'll just click with my mouse, and I'll put a point there. And I'm just going to create a gentle S curve. So let me just pull this down just a little bit here in the center. And I'll click here and just raise it up a little bit. Click here and raise that down a little bit. I don't need to fiddle with it too much, I guess. All right, but we got that gentle kind of S curve going there. So you can, again, tweak yours and get it to a point where you think it's starting to adjust well. And again, keep working with your reference images to see if you're getting someplace close to that. And I'm going to take a quick drink again here. Okay. So next we're going to move on. So we've done the curves or the tonal adjustment. Now we're going to move on to start the color grading to look a little bit more 1990s. So I'm actually going to use another curves layer to do the color grade this time. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon. Come down to curves, click, add the curves layer. And this time, instead of the full RGB that you can see here in the properties panel for the curve, I'm going to, because there's a lot of magentas and reds and things in this 1990s look, I'm going to only work, I'm going to come across to that down arrow with the red color channel. Okay, so you can see it's a red toned color curve now. So that means anything that you move up is going to be red, and cyan is the opposite of red. So anything you pull down will push more cyans into the image. Okay, so again, you're seeing a lot of reds in the shadows here. So I want to work in the shadows or the darks, which is down at this part of the curve, and I'm going to pull it up so that we push more reds into this image in the shadows. Okay, you see what it's doing? Looking at the image, not my grid, because you'll adjust it to taste for yours. Okay, so I move that black point up, and again, it's the red point up, so it's more reds. Now, the other thing that I said is you have more cyans in the highlights. So again, we're going to move to the opposite end of the curve, and we're going to pull down because we want to push some more cyans into this image. And I'm watching the water here because that would be the blues would be. Let's just see what we've done here. Yeah, so if you see, so I'll turn the visibility for the color changes off and on. So we're definitely getting those colors more in there. So that's good. That is pushing the kind of color tones that I see in these reference images into this image here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can also add a color balance layer to try to build on what we are doing here. So it's kind of a gradual build versus trying to achieve it all in one step. So again, bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, and come down to color balance. Click on that. We have our color balance layer. And again, in the properties panel associated with that layer, you can adjust the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Okay, so just click on the one that you want to affect for your image. So I'm just going to go through them in the order that they are. So I've been pushing reds into the shadows. So with the shadows chosen from that list of tone areas to affect, I'm going to move more towards the reds again. So again, building on what we've been doing here. That was too much. I want to go too nuts. Keep it subtle for now and then see what happens. Okay, and then also in the shadows, because they seem to have a lot of yellows in these reference images, I want to push some more yellows. So I'm going to ignore the magentas and green and just go to the yellows for mine. I don't want it too yellow. I don't want it to be that people were doing something in the water and it gets too yellow. Yeah, so that just pushed a little bit in there. Might be able to go up more on the reds. Okay, so once that is the shadows are the way you like, and we're pushing the color tones that I mentioned, from the analysis into the image, then let's maybe move on to the highlights. I'll come back to the midtones last. Okay, so again, I want to push a little bit more of the cyan into the highlights. So we're going towards cyan. Much. I'll stay there. And then again, to get a little bit more blue in there, this time I'll do blues for the highlights. Okay. All right, and then finally with the midtones, you don't necessarily have to do the midtones, but let's just see what it might affect here. So I'll push a little bit more of the yellow tones because there's a lot of yellows in these. And here, not too much. All right, a little bit more red. And then just a hint of some of that magenta. That's probably enough. Yeah, so, all right, so here's with the color grade added, the color balance added, and there's without it. So it's just gradually building, which is good. And then an optional step, but I typically like to do it is, as I said, the saturation is a little bit dulled in the 1990s. So I like to just typically, as a next step, reduce the overall saturation. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, hue and saturation layer, adjustment layer. So we've got the properties panel. So I want to just only work with the saturation slider. We're not going to change the hue here. Typically I reduce it by only like 10 to 15. So I just, let's see where it looks right. And I don't want to take too much color out. Okay, all right, let's leave it there. But yeah, I said typically I'm minus 10 to minus 15 is what I would do. So if you want to do less, you can do less. Just do it to your taste versus mine. Okay, so now I would say we've got the tonal aspects and the color grade done. So now we want to add some fine noise to this. So again, up until this, the prior 3 demos, I was talking about grain. So now, because we're getting into that era that had the digital cameras, I'm going to work with noise this time, just so you have a different option if you want to work with it for the 90s. Okay, so I'm going to add a stamp layer, bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment, empty layer rather. Okay, and then the claw maneuver here, Shift, Controller, Command, Alter, Option, and E all at the same time. And this is going to be fine noise. Okay, so now in order to add the fine noise to this image, we're going to go up to the top of the interface to the layer menu, layer, new, layer. So layer, new, fly out to layer and click. All right, we get the new layer dialog box. And what we want to do is we want to work on a mode right here where my highlighter is of overlay. And change that to overlay and then fill with 50% gray. So just click that little button there so you get the check mark. So for the new layer, mode is overlay and then click fill with 50% gray and click OK. And we get our 50% gray layer. Okay. So now in order to add the noise, we want to go to, with that layer still active, the gray layer, we want to go up to the filter menu, top of the interface, down to where it says noise. Where's noise? Noise. Then fly out to add noise. And filter, noise, add noise, left click. Okay, and we get the add noise. And you can see if I keep mine on preview set on, and you can, you see if I pull this way up, you can see all the noise, and that's like no noise. Okay, so typically what I would recommend is for fine noise, set the amount, which is right here, somewhere between 4 and 8%. I tend to like to err on the lower side when I want fine noise. So let's just, well, maybe I'll just type it in and just do 4. And let me, so you can see the amount of noise there. And you can see what it's doing on the child's face. All right, and then the other thing to keep in mind with this when you're working with the noise is I have mine set to Gaussian and monochromatic. Otherwise, you're going to get all little color specks in there too. So just be sure that Gaussian and monochromatic are activated. And as I said, between 4 and 8%, depending on your taste, to add this noise. Click OK. Okay, so now we have added noise to the image. All right, and if that's still a lot, then top of the layers panel, right across from the overlay blend mode, go over to opacity. You can lessen the opacity if that's too much. So for mine, I think I'll lessen it even more than that 4%. I just want to see a hint of it, noise. Yeah, I think that's good. So I only did a 75% opacity. Maybe you can't see it on the video, but I definitely see some fine grain there with that. Okay, let me zoom back out. All right, so now I'm going to add a stamp layer again. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, the box with the plus, and we do Shift, Controller Command, Alt, or Option, and E. And then what I'm going to do here is add a bit of blur. So as I mentioned again in the analysis, these film photos definitely had a little bit more softness to them than what we see in the digital cameras today. So I want to blur the entire image just a little bit, okay, just a softer, a little bit of a look. So we're going to go up to the filter menu, click on that, come down to blur, and then fly out to Gaussian blur. Filter blur, Gaussian blur, click. We get the Gaussian blur dialog box. And again, just as a general range, I usually stay in the 0.5 to 1.2 pixel range if I'm doing a blur for this kind of an image. So it's just a gentle blur. So I might actually leave it where this is. So you can pull this, here, let me make this bigger so we can see what it's doing. And again, I have preview checked on so you can see what's happening. So that's like way too much blur going on there. Yeah, just a little bit less than that. I'm going to leave mine at 0.7, 0.8, either way. Let me leave it at 0.8. Okay, so as I said, general range 0.5 to 1.2 pixels. And then once you get yours just with a slight soft blur, then click OK. And that accepts it back to the layer. And then I think I might just add a little bit more contrast boost to this. So we'll see if I like it or not. All right, so bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, brightness contrast, press the new layer, and then the associated properties. Maybe to go up a little bit on the brightness because it's outside. I don't want it too dull. Start there to see how it looks. And then I'll add more contrast, and then I'll see if I need to temper it with some brightness. Again, just watching the image and looking at sort of the sense of it relative to a figure like this. It's not bad looking at it's actually not bad. It's too much. I liked it better in the 15 range. Okay. Just a little bit more contrast. Yeah, okay. To me, that sort of has the same kind of separation that guy, the grunge guy, does up here. Okay, so now again, I would say you can stop right here. So to me, this has gotten more of the 1990s kind of look, I think, in terms of simulating a 1990s kind of look. So if we look at the original image and where we've gone with it, it has some of the same kind of color casts. It's got some of the same kind of toning and contrasts. It's definitely got more of the kind of color palette that was in the 1990s prints. So I'd say that that's kind of a good place to stop if you want to stop there. Now, as I said at the beginning, I was going to show you how to do kind of an optional pseudo glossy print paper effect. So you get a little bit of the light reflection with the glossy paper. So you can either stop here, or if you want to experiment with this look, I mean, it's not going to be exact. I think there are overlays you can download from the web. I'm going to try to attach an overlay that I created that you could just drag over this image and then use a blend mode on and then reduce the opacity to try to get that glossy paper look. But I'm going to show you how to build your own manual one as an optional step here in case you like to do it and don't want to work with an overlay, because this will give you more flexibility because you can put the reflections wherever you want if you do it manually. Okay, so either stop here or go on to the optional glossy print paper look. I'll do another stamp layer. Okay, so now for this optional look, what we want to do is with that layer active, we're going to go up to the filter menu, the top of the interface, and come down to the filter gallery, which is here, left click, and we get taken into a different interface. And you can just look over here. I already have it on glass because I've been working with it. But under the filter gallery, if you go to the distort category, that's where you'll find glass. Or you can just come over to the far right column, look on this pull down menu, and there's all the different filter gallery filters and glasses right there. Okay, so you can find glass either way. All right, so now what I want to do is you can play with this for things other than this effect. So definitely with the glossy print paper, it's a smooth surface, and it does have reflections. But if you want to play with glass and other pictures other than the 90s look, you can just play with it and see how much you can distort it and what it will do. So I'm keeping mine on a very subtle distortion of 3. So let me just show you what glass will do. So watch the image. See? So you can get some really interesting glass effects if you do this. But I'm trying to keep it at the point before it starts distorting like that. Okay. And then the smoothness, you maybe could even go all the way up. I keep mine at around 10. Okay, texture, I use it on frosted for this effect. If you hit this down arrow, you can see there's blocks and there's tiny lens and there's canvas. But for glass, I want to keep it on frosted. And then the scaling, I have mine cranked all the way up to 200%. So again, you can experiment and see if you want yours on a different amount. But once you get that all set, then click OK at the top of the right side of the interface. And now we've gotten sort of the stamp layer has become the glass filter look. Okay, so now we want to add a little bit of a reflection because otherwise it's not really going to look very glassy or glossy. Okay, so I'm going to add an empty layer, bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon right there. We get the empty layer. And now I want to work with the gradient tool, and that's what I'm going to use to pull out the reflections. So come to your toolbar, come all the way down, and there's the gradient tool. It has the gradient from dark to light. Just click on that. Be sure it has black so that it is active. And what we want to do is come to the top of the interface to the options bar across the top of the interface for that gradient tool. And you have a choice. I like to work with the new gradient. You can work with the classic one if you want. And then you get to where the gradient library is and it's hidden. You'll just see the currently active one there. Pull that little down arrow. And then you'll see I have a bunch of gradients here, and then there's lists of other ones of different colors, or I've downloaded some. Come to if you don't see anything that I'm going to show you here up in this area, then come to the legacy gradients, click that little down arrow, that sideways arrow to expand it, and then come down to where it says metals. And click again to expand that. And what I'm suggesting that you use to get that reflection look is this gray and white metal. So left click on that so you get the little blue highlight around it to activate it. You can click up here to close that. And then I suggest that you work with the linear gradient, which is, so these are different types of gradient application styles. And I suggest you work with the linear, which is the first one. You can experiment with reflected if you want, but I just have the best luck with the linear. All right, so once you have that set, then you can start dragging out your linear gradient to say where you want the position of your reflections. And let me just see where this goes here. Okay, so I started from the bottom left and I'm just pulling out and it's doing this. So then these are all handles you can adjust to say where the shadow areas and where the reflection areas are going to fall. So I clicked on that handle to move that. Now I'm clicking on this handle or circle to move it, and you can see you just slide it and you can check inside or click inside the diamond to move that. So if you want this closer to the edge of the image, you can do that. Then click inside this diamond to do, and the closer you come in, you can see the harsher the edge. The more you pull out, you can see the transition is different. Okay. All right, and then I'll do the same thing at this end and try to pull, maybe I'll pull this one out more into the image. Just let it trail off a little bit there. And again, I'm not going to worry about it being too perfect. I just want to give you a sense of the tool and how you can create your own reflections if you want. All right, so then just click and move any of these where you want them. So maybe one will go off the edge. All right, so let's say that that is good enough to just put the quote-unquote reflections in there and adjusting the width of them to taste. Okay, once you get that done, then you come over to the layers panel and you want to add a blend mode. So where it says normal, click that down arrow and soft light. Okay, so we've got the soft light blend mode, and you can see now, if I turn that visibility off and on, we've added some reflection in there. And you can decide how much you want the reflection to be. You can still adjust it. So once you see with your image, if you want to change the positioning a little bit, you can. Okay, so I'm going to leave mine there because you'll just place yours where you like, and that's the soft light. And then if this is too much, because for me, I think that might be a little bit much, then just come across from the blend modes to opacity, click on that and drag it down. I might start with 50%, see what that does. Oh, 60 is actually not too bad. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that so that you can see that there's something there. So you just adjust the soft light is definitely what you would use for the blend mode, but then adjust the opacity to your taste as to how much quote unquote reflection that you want. And then, you know, so this to me is the final look that I want to go for here with that glossy paper look added. Okay. If by doing any of this, you've made it too dark, you could always select one particular area of the image and perhaps add an exposure adjustment layer and just brighten it up selectively versus the whole image. But, you know, just do it to taste for your image. And as I mentioned, I will try to attach a PNG that hopefully from Dropbox that you could grab and try to apply if you want, but it will just have the look applied in a certain place. I kind of like this because then you can adjust the reflections to where you like. So I would say that this is it for the end of demo number 2, which was how to create a 1990s style or simulate a 1990s style of color photo. I will pause this for one moment, and then I want to show you something and see how we did here for the different decades, and then just a very, very quick wrap up for the summary. Hold on. Okay, so in summary then, in this part 2 video on how to emulate retro photo looks in Photoshop, I demonstrated how to create 1980s and 90s looks. In the part 1 video, I covered how to create 1960s and 70s looks. So what I'll do is I'll include a link to the part 1 video in the description below here. And I just wanted to show you, so here are some examples of the final look from each decade. So here's my original stock photo, then that's why I wanted to work with it for all of the different decades. So we have the 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s looks that we've tried to simulate or replicate using my original stock photo here. So I said yours will be even more authentic if your shoot includes decade appropriate fashion, hair, props, makeup, etc. But even just starting with an image that you already have that wasn't for a particular decade, you can still simulate or emulate the look of photos from the different eras. So I say just have fun creating retro photo looks and experiment with your own images. Take care. Bye-bye.